The Cadaver Synod, when the Church put a dead pope on trial. January 897, Rome. Inside the Basilica of St. John Lateran, one of the oldest and most important churches in Christianity, a trial is about to begin. The judges are seated. The prosecutor is ready. The accused sits on a throne, dressed in full papal robes. There's just one problem. The defendant has been dead for 9 months. His corpse was dug up from the grave, dressed like a pope, and placed on a chair to stand trial. A terrified teenage deacon was forced to speak for the rotting body, while the current
Pope shouted accusations at his dead predecessor. This actually happened. This is the story of the Cadaver Synod, one of the most disturbing and bizarre events in the history of the Catholic Church. A church in chaos. To understand how something like this could happen, we need to look at Italy.
The late 800s. This period is often called the Iron Age of the Papacy, and the name fits perfectly. Between 872 and 965, there were 24 popes. That's roughly one new pope every 4 years. Even worse, between 896 and 904, 9 popes ruled in just 9 years. For comparison, the entire
20th century had only 9 popes total. Being elected pope during this time was dangerous. You weren't just a spiritual leader. You were a political pawn in a violent struggle between Roman noble families and foreign emperors. The papacy controlled vast lands in central Italy, known as the Papal States. But even
more important than land was one specific power. The Pope could crown the Holy Roman Emperor. That made the papacy incredibly valuable. Whoever controlled the Pope had influence over all of Western Europe. As a result, powerful families fought relentlessly over the papal throne. Popes were imprisoned, poisoned, strangled, or mysteriously died.
Shortly after taking office, the church wasn't a place of peace. It was a battlefield. Enter Pope Formosus. In the middle of this chaos appears Pope Formosus. Formosus wasn't a nobody. He was a skilled diplomat and missionary who helped spread Christianity into Bulgaria. He served as Bishop of Porto, just outside Rome, starting in the 860s. But his success made him enemies. Pope John VIII accused Formosus of breaking church law by holding multiple church offices and of openly wanting to become pope. In 876, Formosus was excommunicated and forced to flee to France. These accusations would come back to haunt him,
even after his death. Eventually, Formosus returned to Rome. Pope Marinus I restored him as Bishop of Porto. Then, in October 891, Formosus was elected pope himself. A dangerous political move. Formosus's papacy was dominated by one major issue: who would control the Holy Roman Empire? At the time, an Italian nobleman named Guy III of Spoleto was emperor, and his son Lambert was set to inherit the throne. The Spoleto family was powerful, aggressive, and deeply involved in Roman politics. Formosus didn't trust them, so he made a risky decision. He invited Arnulf of Carinthia, a Frankish king, to invade Italy and challenge
the Spoleto dynasty. Arnulf accepted. In 896, his army entered Rome. Formosus crowned Arnulf as Holy Roman Emperor, directly undermining Lambert and his family. It was a bold move and a dangerous one. Shortly afterward, Arnulf fell ill and withdrew his army. Within months, both Arnulf and Formosus were dead. Formosus died.
In April 896, everything falls apart. After Formosus's death, the papacy collapsed into chaos. His successor, Pope Boniface VI, ruled for only 2 weeks before dying. Then came Pope Stephen VI. Stephen had strong ties to the Spoleto family. When Lambert and his mother, Angiltrude, returned to Rome and regained power, Stephen became pope with their full support. And they wanted revenge. Formosus had betrayed them. He crowned their enemy emperor. But Formosus was already dead. For most people, that would be the end of it. For Stephen VI, it was just the beginning. Putting a corpse on trial. In January 897, Pope Stephen ordered Formosus's tomb opened.
The body had been decomposing for about 9 months. The corpse was dressed in papal vestments and carried into the Basilica of St. John Lateran. It was placed on a throne. A full ecclesiastical court assembled. Bishops, clergy, and witnesses filled the church. Stephen appointed a teenage deacon
to act as the defense lawyer for the corpse. Then the trial began. The charges. Formosus was accused of 3 crimes: perjury for allegedly breaking an oath never to return to Rome, illegally becoming pope while still Bishop of Porto, seizing the papacy through ambition. These were the same
Accusations made decades earlier by Pope John VIII. Stephen was reopening old wounds for political revenge. According to later historians, Stephen screamed at the corpse, demanding answers. Why had Formosus dared to become pope? Why had he seized power? The corpse obviously said nothing. The young deacon tried to speak, but what he could possibly do? He was a teenager facing the Pope himself in a packed courtroom. The verdict was inevitable. Guilty. Formosus was found guilty on all charges. Stephen declared that everything Formosus had done as pope was invalid. Every ordination he performed was cancelled. Every bishop and priest he consecrated lost their legitimacy. This shook the church to its core. Then came the punishment. The corpse was stripped of its papal robes. The 3 fingers Formosus had used to bless and ordain were cut off. Some sources claim blood flowed, which many at the time interpreted as a supernatural sign. The body, dressed in rags and dragged out of the church. First, it was buried in a common grave. Then Stephen ordered it dug up again and thrown into the Tiber River. A pope's corpse dumped like garbage. Public outrage and revenge. Rome was horrified, even in an era where popes were murdered regularly.
This crossed a line. Riots broke out. An angry mob stormed the Lateran palace. Stephen was dragged from power and thrown into prison. A few months later, he was strangled to death in his cell. The Cadaver Synod destroyed him, undoing the madness. The next popes rushed to undo the damage. Pope
Theodore II, who ruled for only 20 days, declared the trial invalid and ordered Formosus's body given a proper burial. Pope John IX went further. In 898, he officially annulled the Cadaver Synod, restored all of Formosus's actions, and banned any future trials of dead popes. The Church made it clear, this would never happen again. Formosus was reburied with honor in St. Peter's Basilica. What was this really about? Historians still debate the true motive. The traditional view is simple political revenge by the Spoleto family. But some scholars suggest Stephen also had personal reasons. Formosus had made Stephen a bishop. If Formosus's actions were illegal, then Stephen's own position might have been illegitimate, and the trial conveniently erased that problem. There's also a religious angle. In medieval Christianity, bodies of holy figures were believed to hold spiritual power. By putting Formosus's corpse on trial and mutilating it, Stephen wasn't just attacking a man. He was trying to erase his spiritual authority entirely. A lesson from history. The Cadaver Synod shows how unstable and violent the medieval papacy could be. It wasn't just a religious institution. It was a political prize, fought over with extreme brutality. The irony is that the trial backfired completely. Instead of erasing Formosus, it turned him into a victim and destroyed Stephen. History is full of moments that seem unbelievable. A pope digging up another pope, putting a corpse on trial, cutting off its fingers and throwing it in a river sounds like fiction, but it happened, and that's the Cadaver Synod.